Welcome to Inside the Director Circle, and this episode on your cybersecurity, the need for due diligence. I'm Jason Langford-Brown, your host and founder of the Director Circle, practicing business advisor and coaching psychologist. Cybersecurity is a massive topic, and we're probably not going to do it justice today, but I think there's an increasing understanding that if you're going to go through some kind of exit with your business or some kind of M&A activity, it's becoming a crucially important part of the due diligence. So to add some expertise to this subject, we're joined by two of our friends from our knowledge partner, Traz and Hamlin, national law firm that I'm sure many of you know. We're joined by Liz. Liz is Associate Director of the Dispute Resolution Team, specialising in lots of fraud disputes and investigations around many things, but including cybersecurity. And with her is also Amy Rose, who also works with PLCs on lots of cybersecurity risk management and has a specialism in data disputes. And what we also like to do is bring into the room one of our Director Circle members. So delighted today to be joined by Stuart Hadley, who's the Chief Operating Officer of CyberQ Group. So Stuart really comes in with two hats today. He's a business leader, works globally with his firm, but obviously is a cyber business as well. So Stuart, I'm sure you're going to bring some great insights into the discussion today. So I suppose just to get this going, maybe I'll just come to you first, Liz, if that's okay. For those that are on the call are going, I keep hearing about cybersecurity, don't know what the hell is it, let alone what cyber due diligence is. So kind of what is cyber due diligence and why is it so important?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you very much, Jason. So cyber due diligence. Well, I think all your listeners will know what due diligence is in terms of checks and verifying certain processes. That was back in the olden days, I guess. Our world, though, is becoming increasingly digitised, and therefore that's why it is so important now to conduct cyber due diligence. And that's really what we refer to as the process of assessing and understanding the cyber risks that an organisation faces. It could include, for example, an organisation's cybersecurity policies, procedures, controls, i.e. how they are going to respond to a cyber attack or data breach, and also to check that that organisation is acting in accordance with industry best practices and their regulatory compliance. So I'm sure that your listeners will be aware of that data protection compliance, for example. That's just one of the reasons why cyber due diligence is so important. We see it's especially important at the moment in mergers and acquisitions, but also more generally as a health check for organisations, which I think we'll be talking about a bit on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get it. It's a massive increase, I suppose, if I'm buying a business from somebody or merging it with my own business, a massive risk now to my purchase. I suppose I think that probably the thing that sort of tweaks my interest really is how it kind of fits into the traditional due diligence process of commercial diligence, financial due diligence, and kind of how it impacts valuations, I suppose. Have you got a view on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's the government has classed this as a tier one threat. I mean, the threat that cyber breaches pose to businesses is significant. And I guess how cyber due diligence comes into normal commercial due diligence is that there's a technical aspect, I think, to cyber due diligence. Yes, you need legal as well to do the checks in terms of cybersecurity procedures, policies, but we also need the likes of CyberQ Group to really help with the technical aspect. And I think now's probably a good time to bring Stuart in on that and what cyber due diligence looks like from your side, Stuart.
Yeah, so thank you, Liz, and thank you, Jason. So really, just to cover off and re-clarify some of Liz's points there. Yes, understanding your due diligence. What does that actually mean? So really, it's about kind of looking at your processes, your procedures, your control access within your business. Identifying risks in your business is no different than, and like Jason mentioned earlier, around doing your commercial due diligence on your business is risk, assessing the risks. Also thinking about you kind of when you're going, should you have an incident response? And it's more of a case of when, not if, now really, and making sure you've got the right plans in place. Also, again, touching on compliance. So are you aligning to a particular framework, such as NIST, such as 27001, and also awareness for your staff, starting at the C-suite and then going down to the remaining staff within the business is also carrying out regular awareness training. Also looking at your kind of recovery plans as well. So not only from a kind of incident response, but also looking at business continuity. You know, how quickly can you get your business back up and running should an incident recur? And then also a big part of this as well, and I'm sure most business leaders are, is assessing the risks within your supply chain as well. So are you doing some due diligence on your supply chain? You know, what compliance are they adhering to? Are they having regular pen tests? Are they having regular vulnerability scans? And one point that often gets overlooked actually is the digital exposure of your C-suite as well. You know, what does their digital footprint look like? You know, sort of man-in-the-middle attacks, social engineering attacks as well. So I think it's about kind of introducing some controls, some processes, a framework, so that you're on this continuous roadmap to improve your cyber maturity.
It's interesting because I've just, as I was listening to you speak, I spent a lot of time in manufacturing and also in data processing and transactional mail. And so I was in the manufacturing space, really. But, you know, everything you just said there just resonated as something we just used to have to do, because everything we did was business critical in some form. So we had to, you mentioned business continuity. And I think sometimes with these things like cyber due diligence, it's kind of scary for a lot of people. But I'm now listening to you guys, I'm already going, well, this is just business continuity for when I was in manufacturing, you know, back in the 90s and, you know, those dark ages that people might
No,
remember.
absolutely. It's no different. And I think just because it's got the tagline of cyber, everybody gets afraid and kind of try and steps back and go, what cyber? So, you know, it's kind of, it's got to start at the C-suite. It's imperative it starts at board level C-suite, and then it can trickle down to the rest of the business.
But just a quick question for you from a business leader perspective. This is sounding to me like it's not something new that people need to do. It just seems to be a new dimension to what was already there in terms of due diligence and business continuity. Would that be fair? And that's probably the challenge.
Yeah, sorry, Jason. Yes and no. So a little bit. I think kind of previous to 2023, and we're starting to see a change really in terms of business. It's all focused on tech. So everybody's going out and buying the latest tech, putting it in the server rooms, whatever that looked like. Well, actually, it's just part of the puzzle, really, part of your onion layers. So we're seeing a shift now where businesses are taking more notice of the compliance, taking more notice of the procedures, making sure they've got the policies, making sure they've got the documents in place. There's no silver bullet to cybersecurity, but what you do is you make it harder and harder and harder. So you build out those onion layers to protect your business.
I think as well,
it's been at the core of that onion.
Yeah.
If I might as well, Stuart, add to that, like I said, our world has expanded to be on an ever-increasing digital platform. Gone are the days where you're getting a fraudster walk through your front door. They're walking through your virtual front door now. So it's that added dimension. And I think the effect of a serious cybersecurity breach is phenomenal on a company's share price. Like if you take Equifax, for example, after their breach, their share price dropped by 31%. And if you don't do your cyber due diligence, a purchaser of a company could find themselves in the fallout of either a cyber attack that's already taken place, or one that's being lined up to do so, which can have catastrophic consequences, particularly in terms of losses and reputation.
Yeah, and Liz, I just wanted to add to that, because I think when people hear, you know, the kind of like a big PLC like Equifax with that big share price, they think, well, we're an SME, you know, a privately owned family business, doesn't apply to us. But I would say, you know, you have to read the clue there. The clue is that the city is seeing a massive additional risk, which is why the share price drops. If you're an SME selling your business, the individual buying you, even if it's an angel investor, is having the same conversation with themselves. I'm just seeing bigger risk here, so I'm going to pay you. If I'm going to buy you at all, I'm going to pay you less. So it's a lesser valuation, isn't it? So I think it's a really important point to use.
Exactly.
Amy Rose, I don't know if you're ready for this question, Amy Rose, but I think, you know, just keeping practical on this, because what I see, you know, I have worked with hundreds of business leaders all over the world, and I think, if I'm really honest, I think the biggest challenge is, and even in my own mind, I think because this is so, it's not tangible, this is it. And I think still most business leaders just go, I know it's a thing, I get it, I hear stories, but is it really that big? How big is the risk really? You know, can you give us any context of how serious and how big is this risk to sort of businesses generally in all sectors?
Yeah, of course. I think, well, as Liz said, it's threat number one. And I think it's becoming more and more topical at the moment as we're seeing sort of cyber attacks get more and more sophisticated. I think it's a huge risk for all businesses, because it's we're in an increasingly digital world, and things are online, and it's easier for criminals to get access to your data. So there's things like chatbots which are allowing criminals to develop more and more sophisticated means, or there's cyber criminals which are groups that sort of actually advertise their services as a commodity. So you could actually pay cyber criminals to carry out attacks on businesses, which is slightly terrifying and mind-blowing, but it's something that business leaders certainly need to be discussing, need to be aware about, and need to have those procedures and policies in place just in case the inevitable does happen, which is unfortunate, but we're seeing it more and more often. So I think it's something that they need to be aware of, not just for due diligence for M&A purchases, but just for general business continuity, as Stuart was saying.
I mean, that's quite scary, isn't it? Just the sophistication of what is essentially the criminal world. I had visions in my head. I used to, you'd pay a hitman or a gangster in prohibition times to whack somebody, and now we just pay them to cyber, to cyber attack somebody. But it's kind of the same kind of principle, isn't it? Really, it's kind of scary, really. Are there any stats in terms of how many people get attacked, or are there things that we can use just to wake people up to kind of, they hear the government say it's threat number one, but I'm not sure people really listen to that.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Jason, because kind of my belief around this is you can get too scared around stats.
Okay.
You can get too, this kind of numbers being thrown about that is going to cost hundreds of billions, hundred millions pounds a year. The truth of the matter is everybody's under attack, and it's, we've obviously what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. The number of attacks has heightened. The sophistication of the attacks has heightened as well. And with cyber DD, just taking, it's not, I think there's this myth also around kind of it's expensive. Cyber's not expensive. It isn't. It's as expensive as you're making it. Just weak passwords, change your password policy, encryption policies, making sure your critical data is encrypted. Making sure your network's air-gapped, so where you've got one particular piece of data here and you don't want that part of the business to have access to that, which may be a weak point, segregate your network, looking at your software, looking at your hardware, making sure it's all up to date. Any decent IT manager or CISO within a business will know these, and like I said, it's just taking away that myth. So like I said, I try not to, or CyberQ Group, we try not to get too engrossed in the stats, because there's loads of stats out there, and it kind of can sort of blow your mind in terms of what's going on, to be honest.
That's good to hear, because I think I know what you mean. Six kind of stats can be confusing, but that again, just listening to you there, I was in my head, I'm thinking, as a business leader, and business leaders aren't always highly technical. Maybe they will become more and more so as generations progress. But just as you just said, there's a simple question to an IT manager, a CTO, or even an outsourced client, if you use an outsourced IT provider, to say, what are you doing to ensure we're cyber safe? Sounds like I should be looking for just a bunch of very pragmatic actions that they've got covered off.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I think I was going to ask about some practical things people could be doing. I think that kind of gets to that one. Is that maybe just come back to you, Liz? Are there some legal sort of regulatory compliance things that people should start to become aware of? Because I'm sure we're going to get more compliance thrown around, what we need to follow to stay in line.
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm sure there's more coming down at the track, but I mean, everyone will be on board now with your business leaders. Be on board with the GDPR data protection that plays a key role in cyber due diligence. I think when you're looking at cyber due diligence, either from if we take it from an M&A angle, it is the purchaser, for example, or even seller. Are you under an obligation to conduct cyber due diligence? I think there's New York, for example, they've brought in that's mandatory, so that that there's a serious due diligence process in place regarding cybersecurity. So depending on how global your M&A structure is progressing, it's important to remember that. But also in terms of data protection, I mentioned, what's the nature of the data being handled or held by the target? If there's a large amount of personal or sensitive data being held, then the business leader in question will have to think, okay, well, it's going to be particularly important that I consider this target's data protection compliance and processes, what's in place. So I guess as well, depending on what's uncovered through cyber due diligence will shape how the deal looks, whether that is a lower purchase price or whether you weave in additional protection in your contract, like the likes of warranties, specific indemnities, to add that protection, unless the risk is so big that the deal becomes unviable.
Sure.
So yeah, that's from an M&A perspective. There are some of those, particularly data protection, also applies to business leaders looking inwardly at, how cyber ready am I and what due diligence they should be performing on themselves.
And again, I think it just gives us another dimension of, another dimension of risk that is either going to reduce the price, or not reduce the price if you've got it covered, obviously, which is what you want, or as you said, makes it so big that it's too risky to do the deal. So yeah, I like that. Thank you. And Rose, I know you do some stuff with personal individuals, and this is interesting because my daughter's home from university this week, and she's got a friend who's got a brain the size of a planet and is doing a PhD on cybersecurity and data protection and stuff that I don't even understand.
For me, then.
Yeah. So it's interesting. But a conversation over dinner last night, just trying to keep this real for people. I was going to ask some specific examples in a minute, but it got me thinking about an individual level. Because of what he does, he will challenge when his own personal data is asked for. Even to the extent, really simple, you gave several examples, but a really simple example, an outsourced security firm were IDing students off their card, but when they were IDing their card, they were essentially taking all the data off their card, which was way beyond just, are you old enough to come in and have a drink, And he knew what to ask in terms of, do they have certain compliance, which you would understand, I didn't understand, in place, which they couldn't prove. And also, of course, this notion that what are you going to do with it until you're now selling it, So I just don't know. It just got me thinking. We were going to come on this call today. For individuals, is there something that should we be challenging more? Should we be asking more questions? I don't want to get into conspiracy theories again, but people are just so ignorant about all this stuff, aren't they? We just gladly give anything that's asked of us, and it got me thinking: should we be doing that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jason. And I think we should challenge more when our data is asked for as to whether it's for lawful purposes, or even things like going on websites and accepting cookies. Yeah. Should we be clicking, yes, we accept all? Is the website actually got the right procedures in place that allows you to only accept strictly necessary? Because consent shouldn't really be tacit, it should be given fairly, and same with things like asking for personal data. Each company should be considering whether that process is fair, and if you're a holder of data, you should make sure that you've got sufficient sort of procedures and protection in place for the data that you're processing. So I think that we should definitely be asking more about what our data is being held for, because ultimately if that company suffers a cyber attack, your data is on the line. So things like credit card information being stored, and often it says, do you want to store this for next time? Even sort of Google Chrome asks you that. So I think there's little things like that we think makes our life so much easier, but in the long run it could present a risk that more of our data is out there. And some people might say, well, I've got nothing to hide, which is fair enough, but also there's the risk that companies might not use your data in the best way, or cyber criminals might gain access to your data and use it for illicit purposes.
Yeah, So again, it's
I
all
mean,
those onion
Jason,
layers.
sorry. I mean,
Go on,
without
go on,
getting
go on.
into conspiracy theories and all that, you know, because this could
It's
definitely
fun.
go a lot deeper and a lot darker. But I think going back to Amy's point there, I think it's down to the individual, isn't it? But I mean, obviously, if you think about what went on in the US 2012 onwards, in terms of, you know, the NSA asking for data, having access to data, actually paying the companies to have access to the data, it just opens up a whole world of worms, etc. And it is kind of a big subject, isn't it, really? But the one thing, as well as allowing these companies to track your cookies and track your information, what cyber DD have these companies got in place as well? So could the cyber criminals be, start building up a picture of you, especially from a social engineering perspective? And we're all hearing about man-in-the-middle attacks. What does a man-in-the-middle attack? I act as if I was Jason. I send an email to Amy, acting like you, Jason. I say, Amy, I quickly need some money. Can you transfer it to this bank? I know it's not the usual one. And then Amy doesn't question that. But all of that data that's living out there, it could eventually kind of bring that, you know, to the forefront in terms of that kind of attack. So kind of off piece there a little bit, but I think it's all kind of relevant, really.
I think it's just awareness, isn't it? Again, I've got two examples in my wider kind of, I suppose, people that I know, and just in the last 2 weeks that are both, now, on one level, I think they're stupid, but, you know, in all seriousness, it's like we're talking tens of thousands of pounds they've given away to cyber criminals on an individual level. But these people are sophisticated. When you're busy and you're stressed and you think you're talking to, you know, anything's possible, or one of the cases, one of the people's in a bit of an emotional dark place. So, you know, that's why I know they've made that poor decision, you know. So it's really, it just got me thinking. So I thought it was worth throwing in. I think probably just because I'm just conscious of time, I think I just wanted to maybe just think about, I think, Stuart, you answered this to a point, but maybe you sort of get this from Liz. For those that are not in an M&A or, you know, thinking of exit, but want to be doing the right thing with a view that actually when that comes around, they're in a good place, what would be maybe a few proactive measures, Liz, that business people should be taking to sort of be more due diligent around this stuff?
Yeah, sure. It's stress testing yourself as a company. I know, for example, CyberQ, they do penetration testing. So getting the likes of CyberQ to try and hack your organization. Can they get in? What are your weak points, as Stuart was saying earlier? And if there are any identified, making sure that you take steps to resolve those, whether it's a simple software update, or whether it is, for example, increasing employee training. You mentioned the point about awareness, Jason, and you're spot on there. A lot of people like to view employees as it could be your biggest weakness, but actually, if they're trained properly, they can be your biggest strength and your biggest barrier to cyber attacks. They're the ones who are getting the phishing emails, which are becoming far more sophisticated now through the rise of chatbots. Gone are the days where you've got poorly spelt and phishing emails full of grammatical errors. So it's making sure you're giving your employees a fair shot to make sure they're fully trained up on this stuff, that they know how to identify those phishing emails, or just to highlight as well to those individuals the importance of not being so process driven. So I feel in this ever increasing digitized world that's the danger that we're entering into. I'd encourage employees and business leaders to just take a step back and think, I appreciate everyone's so busy, but just to think, actually, does this email or whatever fit in with my day-to-day role, or is it a little bit strange that they're asking me for different to use different bank details, for example? A couple more things, again, conscious of time, sorry, is
go on, you're fine.
Thinking about cyber response plans. So if the inevitable happens and organisation does get breached, it's important to respond quickly to minimise that loss, whether that be financial, reputational, or both. So it's important for business leaders and their staff to know who to contact, who your external team that you're going to reach out to, saying, help, we've been breached, we can't access X, Y, and Z, or we can't function. It could be so bad that it stops your business operating. But you need to respond quickly, get the technical guys in, get the breach, get the data either recovered, and so you can, and the processes are back up and running again. And I think most importantly, after that, it's about lessons learned. I think a final one is, do you know enough about your external vendors? The biggest weakness for organisations is your supply chain. And I'm seeing more and more organisations now really auditing their supply chain, looking at those third-party contracts and making sure that those suppliers have adequate cybersecurity protocols in place, because it could be you get attacked via them, might not come to you directly.
Yeah, and how often does that happen? It's for someone, we get something from someone we know, absolutely. It's always been that way, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liz. I think I'm just trying. There's so much to summarise there, really. But I think clearly the awareness piece is huge. I love the fact just trying to see this as just another risk mitigation necessity, but looking at that beyond your own business into your supply chain, business continuity, all that kind of stuff. That was really good messages from that today. I love the thing about the stress testing. I think I'm just thinking of Stuart's onion now, see how tough your layers of your onion are, really. But I think you're right, the awareness training for people, I see that a lot. I do a lot of work on process, and process is great from an efficiency and effectiveness perspective, or efficiency perspective. But I see a bit of a trend at the minute where people are just almost blind to their process. That's the process, just keep doing it. And I see a real lack of critical thinking. So we're doing a lot of work with people at the moment to go, look, your process is your guide, but within your process, you've got to stop and think. It's what I should be doing next, but depending on what's going on around me, is it right? So that definitely works in the cyber context. And as part of that, we also say, when it does go wrong, how do we stop and debrief lessons learned, again, more critical thinking skills. So there is a bit in here in a world of digitization where everything, when we just talk about chatbots in the next episode for those that are listening at the moment, how do we teach people to still keep thinking in a world where people think for you or machines think for you? So just to finish today, maybe if I could, I think a question I maybe leave you with is, if we wanted to get exec teams, boards of directors to sort of get cyber on the agenda more frequently, so one question they should be asking around their board tables. If we leave you that easy question just to finish us off. Amy, do you want to give us what yours would be?
Yes, I think it would be, they should be asking, do we have a cybersecurity framework? Do we have something in place? Who are the key stakeholders that need to be involved in this? A lot of people think, oh, it's an IT problem, cyber must be IT, but actually it extends beyond that, and it's important to make sure that all the right people in the business are involved. So that would be my top tip to be thinking about.
Great, thanks, Amy. Liz?
I think mine will pick on my last point I made about third parties. When was the last time we checked in on our suppliers and audited them?
Yeah, fantastic. Stuart?
Quite a few there. There's a list as long as your arm, really. But I guess the one key takeaway is, are we compliant? Are we compliant with our suppliers? Are we compliant with our regulations within our industry? Compliance covers off a lot of things, but obviously, there's kind of lots of support out there from the NTSE. There's a lot of guidance on their website, and again, taking away this myth of it being really expensive. There is an awful lot of information out there, and I know it's a minefield, but I think if you're at that starting point, use the guidance from the NTSE. And then, and then you can become more and more sophisticated as you progress as a business.
To start the journey is probably the message there, Stuart, really, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you all. Great. It was a great conversation. I said in the next episode, we're going to be talking about all things chatbots, which is very topical at the moment. And Liz and Amy Rose are going to join us for that. So I'm looking forward to that. If you want more information on what we talked about today, obviously you can reach out to us at the Directors Circle, directors-circle.com. And Stuart, Amy and Liz are obviously always available to take questions on this as specialists in the area. I'm sure they can find you all on LinkedIn. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to Inside the Directors Circle.